Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're so glad to have you joining us today for our WBECS 2019 pre-summit. Please let me know you can hear me by typing into the Q&A box where in the world you're joining us from today. And Anna-Marie Lombard and I would really love to know, have you heard of sensory intelligence before? Or maybe some of you have been exposed to this material before. So I see some people are calling from Singapore, the US, Bangalore, Netherlands, Czech Republic, Germany, Brazil, Egypt, the UK. Oh my goodness. Welcome everyone, amazing. Some people have heard of sensory intelligence, but for some people it's all new. So Julie says never exposed to it, haven't heard of it before. Well, you're in for a treat and I can't wait for this session. Today's session will include a short quiz. So this is the moment for you to grab a pen and paper. You're gonna love it. So it's gonna be so nice. So just take a few moments to get yourself a pen and paper so you can enjoy this as well and participate. So today's session will last for 45 minutes. You can use the Q&A box for all your questions. We will take the questions at the end of the session. The chat box is disabled for you, but we will be using it to deliver information to you and useful links. So every time I am mentioning a link, we will post the link to the chat box. My name is Dimi Kasaria. I am a program manager at the WBECS group, and I will be your host for today's session. We also have Anya joining us today to gather your questions and comments. Turn off all your distractions, allow yourself to be fully focused and engaged. This is amazing material, and we can't wait for it. So as you know, WBECS's mission is to significantly raise the global standard of coaching. And we do this by partnering with brilliant thought leaders and providing you with content that you can consume online. We also have a highly engaged global coach community, and there are a couple of ways you can connect with them after this session. First of all, we would love to hear your comments about today's session on Facebook. You can do this by going to the Facebook link we're placing in the chat box now. We also encourage you to continue the conversation on what you learned today in our coach-led implementation mastery sessions, where you can discuss how to apply what you learned today in your coaching practice. The registration link will be also put in the chat box just in a moment. Right now, we are in the last 6 days before our pre-summit ends, and it gives you a great taste of what you can expect in our full summit. Our full summit will feature 8 months of immersive learning in a variety of sessions. This session we've had content sessions, live coaching demos, panel discussions, and coach-led Q&As. We also have just been awarded with over 240 CCE units for the pre and the full summit combined. And for those of you who are interested in checking this out, all the details are listed at wbecs.com/summit. This link will also be in the chat box for you in just a minute. So let's get started. Today we have a very special session, and I'm honored to introduce Dr. Anna-Marie Lombard. Anna-Marie is a global expert in learning, people development, and sensory intelligence. She has a PhD in occupational therapy. She's the founder and CEO of Sensory Intelligence Consulting and the author of the book Sensory Intelligence: Why It Matters More Than IQ and EQ. She has 30 years of global experience in people development and learning, and practiced as an occupational therapist for 15 years dealing with children with special needs, learning, and attention difficulties. A fun fact about Anna-Marie is that she loves bright lights, loud music, and dancing in the dark. And with that, I will hand it over to Anna-Marie. Welcome, Anna-Marie.
Thanks, Demi, and thanks for everyone out there. It's absolutely an honor to be sharing what I've been working with for so many years. So looking forward to sharing this journey with you. So if we kickstart and get going on the material, obviously sensory intelligence is obviously fitting really well into the coach methodology. It's all about understanding and learning about yourself in a very different way. It's obviously all about the senses, and intelligence is obviously all about the brain. How do we utilize this very unique sensory neuroscience on what the senses are like, and how does the environment through stimulus response actually impact our day-to-day living, our learning, and our behavior? So I'm going to do a little bit of a reality check for you. Why do I think sensory intelligence has got such an important role to play for a particular coach? IQ, EQ, and sensory intelligence, how are they different? Then obviously I need to allow you a little bit of a glimpse into yourself. You'll do the sensory quiz, which will help you quickly to determine your sensory style. And the key strategies that we're going to look at is self-regulation, but self-regulation through the senses. How can we utilize very simple, practical, easy methodology for us to be more, less stressed, more energized, and actually just manage ourselves much, much better. So that's the whole idea. This is a little bit what our world look like, very overloaded. And I think we can all agree wherever in the world we are, the world is just getting busier and busier and faster and faster. And obviously, because of all of this overload, the result is often stress, disengagement, we get ill, we get sick, depression, anxiety, stress, drop in performance. We know from a World Health Organization point of view that stress and pressure, depression, burnout are really critical issues that we need to help people to obviously to focus with. Our approach is going, if we understand this whole world, what does the brain do? How does the brain absorb the senses? Through the senses, through the 7 senses. We actually have 7 senses, not just 5. And how does it impact the way that we work? We obviously learn and we live. So the 7 senses, we use it a little bit of a barcode. All of us are unique. All of us are different. We've got seeing and hearing, which is predominantly our visual senses. That's how we utilize most of information in our environment. Then we've got smell, touch and taste. Obviously they are more our social senses. Touch is in our skin. We've got skin from the top of our head right down to the soles of our feet. Taste and smell is really how do we utilize food and our environment. And then we also, the 2 hidden senses are 2 movement senses. One is called the vestibular system. It's located in your inner ear. GPS of your body gives you feedback where you are in space. And even sitting up straight on a chair is a production of your vestibular system giving you feedback where you are. Works very well together with your proprioceptive sense in your muscles and in your joints. Every time when we move, the body receives feedback of where the body is moving into space. So important to understand that seeing and hearing, information senses, smell, touch, and taste and touch are social senses, and then movement is our regulation sense, very, very important. Sitting is the new smoking, so every time when we move the body, we obviously create a lot of regulation and de-stressing and recharging for the body, which most of us really know about, but it also has got a sensory pathway component. Then if we understand overload, because we process the world through the senses, it enters the brain at the bottom and at the bottom only. So sensory processing is one of the key things that occur first before it actually moves up for action and for executive function within the human brain. So if we understand the sensory, the neuroscience hierarchy, that's a little bit of a picture of the brain. And if we look about the research, it's quite clear the brain can be packed into 2 parts, top part, bottom part. The top part of the brain, conscious, controlled, calculated. The bottom part of the brain, a lot more unconscious, uncontrolled, and intuitive. The top of the brain, the executive brain, we reason, we think, we learn, and we perform. The bottom part of the brain, our gut, our habits, preferences, and our comfort levels. And then what's interesting, those of you who's read the book, Daniel Kahneman, one of my favorites, Thinking Fast and Slow, really does talk about the amount of energy that's been allocated into the executive brain, which is only about 20%, where this lower part, this primitive part of our brain actually activates 80% of brain activity. There's so much more going on into this low part of our brain than what we think or what we even anticipate. Think about the last time then you've done something or said something to realize, oops, wrong thing, I shouldn't have done that. That's the intuitive brain kicking in, creating an immediate response. The lower part of the brain doesn't have thinking or reasoning capacity. That only happens in the executive brain. So it really just go back into primitive brain, lower brain structures. How does it influence our day-to-day behaviors and everything that we do? Also, attention, emotion, behavior, 3 key human behavior functions that we need, and it does kickstart in the lower part of the brain. So the senses kickstart the whole process of, are we focused, are we in the moment, are we attending, are we emotionally regulated, and then can we behave accordingly, which then filters into all of our daily productivity. So that's the hierarchy, thinking about sensory intelligence, emotional intelligence, and IQ. All of them are important, obviously, but considering that information enters the brain at the bottom, sensory intelligence occurs firstly throughout these lower brain structures and these various primitive brain structures at play here, before it goes into the limbic system for EQ, and then obviously moves up into the IQ for executive use. So it's just really going back to hierarchical. How do we take the brain really back down to basics, which is obviously what we want to start to do. Briefly, everything that we do is around understanding the environment, because the environment we actually do access through the senses. And I just think a brilliant example is those of you who understand the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where the people are actually being put really much on the spot, lots of lights, uncomfortable chairs, lots of music. So what is happening here, that 80-20% principle are utilized really, really well. If the brain is not feeling in a comfortable space, it doesn't release enough executive function in order to think up those really questions that we need to do. So I'm always joking and say these guys has known how to actually use the 80-20% principle of the brain and utilizing the environment to make us feel a little bit at the edge, a little bit uncomfortable, so it doesn't release the brain for use. The contestants always say, oh, if I'm at home, I know all of these answers, but when I'm here, I don't. What has changed? The environment. So environment is really, really critical in order to understand what goes on. So the value, just a little bit, understand your senses, because that's what activates the brain first and foremost, immediate first stimulus. How does your brain work? What is your intuitive responses, your habits and behaviors? Because that is the kickstart process, or one of the initial responses for it. Your behavior, other behaviors, which is really important. Some of us are sensitive to noise, others actually are not. Some of us turn the radio down, others turn the radio up or the music up. So we've got various preferences. And then we also drop labels and stop judging. So it's really having a key of understanding behavior from a sensory processing level, and how do each of us individually access the environment based on our sensory coding. Self-awareness, team awareness, strategy and solutions. And if we have that, then how are we more productive and successful? Health and well-being for me is really, really critical, important. And then relationships. We're not all the same. We're different. How do we manage that? So the sensory quiz, those of you, please have your pen and paper ready, because it really makes a difference if we can make it very personal for you. I'm going to ask you 15 really baseline questions. It's not 100% statistically trial and tested. I've done various research, and we've got really comprehensive sensory style questionnaires, but this is just a quick and easy way to get access to it. So it's a nice way to get introduced. I'm going to give you 15 questions. You have to choose, do you prefer either A or B? Please choose one. Don't say, oh, I don't necessarily know, because then you can't necessarily calculate your answers. If you haven't been exposed to it before, what would you choose if you had a chance? So, and obviously, like the brain work, I don't want you to overthink it. I want you to go with your gut first response, because that will be the correct one, and indicating what is your sensory style and your sensory preference, obviously. This is an example. It's going to look like that. Do you prefer A, hot temperatures, or B, cold temperatures? And then you would just list that on your answers. So on your piece of paper, write numbers 1 to 15. I'm going to go through the slides, ask you those questions. I'm going to run through it fairly quickly, because particularly I don't want you to get stuck into those questions too much. Don't want you to overthink, because then you're going to make an executive decision, and I actually want you to make a gut decision. What's your initial response? Because that would be the right one. Okay, here we go. Do you prefer A or B? So now question 1, do you prefer A, seed bread rolls, or B, plain bread rolls? Hopefully everyone in the audience will know what are bread rolls. I'm sure they do. Number 2, A or B, hot, spicy, chili meats, or very minced. That would be very chili and spicy food, versus mashed potatoes, more blander kind of food. 3, an electric toothbrush. B, a manual toothbrush. 4A, do you prefer red, orange, pink, or blue, B, white, gray, or beige? So go quick, which of those stands out to you? Number 5, would you prefer to rather go bungee jumping or B, scuba diving? If you haven't done them before, which one will you choose? Okay, so think and think carefully. So you should have 5 questions there, either A or either B. I hope it's okay. I'm going to move on to the next slide so that you don't overthink it. 6A, do you prefer a light tickle or B, a firm hug? 7, do you prefer a night out in town with your friends or be curled up in bed with a book or a magazine? 8, a surprise party or be a monthly book or fishing club or a craft club, any kind of closed group that you would do something that you know with a known group of friends. 9A, a polo neck sweater versus B, a V-neck sweater, looking at clothing because these are all essentially choices. 10, would you do aerobics in a gym, a public space, or would you prefer to do weight training at home in your own home gym if you would have a choice? Hopefully you've all got another 5 questions for those. We go to the last slide. 11 questions. A or B, do you prefer soccer, football, hockey, or golf, tennis, running? I'm asking them for a very particular reason, so think clearly, think carefully. 12A, do you prefer dogs or cats? 13, do you prefer to make a phone call, or B, prefer to do an email, or, you know, more those type of correspondence or communication styles? 14, would you prefer to go camping and really rough it and be out in the open, or B, would you prefer to go a fancy hotel and get really all spoiled and sorted? 15, would you garden without gloves, get your hands dirty, or B, gardening with gloves? Okay, so these are another 5 questions that I've asked you. So obviously every time it's either A or B, don't overthink, and then just capture your preferences for each of those. Right, and then obviously what we want to do, calculate your scores. How many A's do you have? How many B's do you have? And obviously what I've tried to do here, I'm sure you've seen the trend. I've been asking you sensory-based questions. What are your sensory preferences? Because if we understand your sensory preferences, we can get a really good idea how does your body respond to your environment very intuitively. Okay, so then what I've put together, because sometimes sensory processing styles, the theory and the base behind this is quite complex. It's a lot of neuroscience, a lot of brain pathways, but I've designed a sensory tree, which is a really lovely way to keep it simple, to make it very open and relevant, and it's a really fun analogy to use and to work with. Obviously, also from a sensory intelligence point of view, there's no right or wrong. You don't need to improve your score. IQ, you always need to be better. EQ, you always need to improve it. But sensory intelligence is not in the same class or the same classification there. I want you to understand, who are you? How does this add a different dimension to your behavior? And how do we utilize those knowledge and that insight to anticipate what's going to happen in our world? So what we have got 3, this is a continuum, but we have 3 groupings here. Looking at a tree, leaves are sensory seekers, people with high thresholds. They enjoy stimulation, they go out for stimulation, they would have towards responses to any kind of sensory stimulation. And that's typically what leaves are. They're in the sun, the wind, the butterflies, the bees, the birds come and visit them, they fall off, they grow, seasons change. So there's a lot of activity that goes on at the top of a tree. Roots are the other end of the spectrum, lower down in the ground. Roots are quiet, calm. There's the odd earthworm or a mole, but they're definitely not noisy. But roots are a lot more stable. They're very deep down in the ground. They get fed by the soil, and they're very sturdy, and they actually keep the tree very much grounded. Those are called our sensory avoiders. And then sensory neutrals are people that we call as part of the trunk. So those are people who's got no particular strong preference to, do I need to create less information in my environment, the avoiders, or more information in my environment, the seekers. So they've got more of a neutral style. Okay, so that's what we're going to try to unpack here. So I hope you've got your score ready. And how we're going to look at now, if you had 9 and more questions for A, in other words, out of those 15, you've scored A for 9 and more, you are the leaves of the sensory tree, and you've got high sensory thresholds. And this is where it becomes quite a lot of fun. What does it mean to have high sensory thresholds? Very similar to pain thresholds. It's obviously not the same as pain threshold, but it's a nice way to draw the correlation. People with high pain threshold would, for instance, look at you, oh, I'm bleeding. I don't even know that I've scratched myself. So if we look at your 7 sensory systems, the same principles apply, or understanding it from that same level. High sensory threshold means your brain is not overly aware of it and would seek out more of that input. So typically this group of people has got very high energy. They also energize through external stimuli, and they like and they thrive on busy, active, engaging type of environments. This is typically the person on a Friday night, you know, when there was a rough week, like, okay, what's the next thing? Who are we going to go out to? And typically those people are always ready for, you know, the next type of stimulation, which they typically enjoy. They can be highly distractible. They get bored fairly quickly. Worst would be to put this person in a library. They would get bored stiff out of their mind. So they prefer actually a lot more engaging, busy, lively type of environments. They also embrace and they enjoy change. They typically are high risk takers. They've got a yes predisposition, because yes means bring it on, let's get more stimulation. But they have a tendency to first do and then think, oh, maybe I've taken on too much. It's a little bit of an impulsivity, because let's just stimulate the brain more. They also have a tendency to avoid or dislike detail, structure, and rules. They can do detail. It's not a matter of, do we have the capacity? It's like, what does the brain naturally gravitate towards? So people with high threshold don't like too much detail or structural rules, because there's a tendency for monotony into that process, which they, you know, deep down unconsciously don't necessarily always enjoy, or definitely not for long periods of time. They're unstructured, prefer variety and surprise elements. Give or leave a surprise party, they love it. Typically that's something that they would find very interesting, engaging. Large group of people, they feel very familiar and easy with that. And then what's interesting, if we look at stress levels, this group has got low stress levels because they're not so aware of their environment. They typically like a little bit of the saying, water over duck's back, but they don't have they're not very aware from a sensory point of view. So from that point of view, they often don't necessarily manage their stress well, because the awareness kicks in too late. I always say leaves or people with high thresholds don't have good brakes. They don't know when to stop. And then also high risk for aggression, substance abuse, and reckless behavior. There are some really clear research to show that. So I'm saying risk, I'm not saying it is true, but because of this tendency for the brain to seek out stimulation, they can overdo it a little bit too much. So it's an interesting one and an important potential risk to look at. Hopefully those of you who are leaves agreed. Could you relate with that or not relate with it? The higher the score, obviously, the more prominent it is, and it is a little bit of just a screening, but a fun way to get your head around the material. Our trunks, which be 8 or less for both, that would be medium sensory thresholds. This group doesn't necessarily have a strong preference for either too much stimulation in your environment or too little. Medium energy, they focus and attention is appropriate to the task at hand. Changes measured and calculated. They're very good mediators, because this group is not environmentally so either aversive, avoiding, or seeking towards responses. So there's a level of flexibility. They can see two sides to a story, adaptable. They can use yes and no appropriately. They engage easily with small or large groups, so they don't have a strong preference. They also get stress. Obviously, stress is relevant across all of us, but their stress risks are not dependent on their environment and on the amount of environmental stimuli, so it's usually outside of their environment base. And sorry guys, I hate people saying you're a little bit boring, but let's have fun with it. No, you're not really boring, but because there's a way or a tendency to be flexible and to go with the flow, you could be perceived as boring. So there's the smiley face for you, not really, but it just shows a little bit of a tendency that we have. So those who are the trunks, 8 and less, so just remember your mediating style is really, really relevant and really great to have in any team and anywhere where you need to work. Okay, let's move to the last one, the roots. These are the group of people that has 9 or more for B. So those of you have there, you are low sensory thresholds, you are the roots of the tree. This group has got lower energy levels in the sense that they rather energize through internal stimuli. So they are the typical the person who's definitely not going to go out on a Friday night after a busy week. Like, I definitely want to be home. I want to put my feet up, have something nice to drink, and watch TV or read my book and be in a quiet space. They prefer contained, quiet, calm environments. Remember, we go back to environment. That's what they prefer. There's also high distractibility element because these people can get overstimulated because the brain overabsorbs the environment and it actually overtakes or over intake of sensory stimulation. They avoid and resist change. They are low risk takers. Change means I have to switch gears and there's a lot of new things that come my way. So that's typically what this group likes to prefer. They've got a no predisposition because they would always think first and then do, because if they're low risk taking, it's as if their brain actually do take in more information. So they've got a lot more information to deal with and they have a tendency to go back into all of those processing and that information that they've stored in order to make sense of their world. They prefer detailed structure and rules because that's just a more contained space and you know what to expect. They're very secure and grounded. They love routine and predictability. That's quite important for them. Excuse me. They prefer to engage with smaller groups of people. Obviously, people can be very sensory overloaded. There's a lot of stuff going on when people is in the equation. So smaller groups of people are less sensory overloaded. So that's their preference. This group has got high stress levels because of the over intake of sensory information from their environment, but they also have a high level of sensory awareness. So I personally have found it's a little bit easier to work with this group from a general stress management point of view because their awareness levels are much higher. Not to say that they might be managing their stress well, but they would much quicker feel that they're getting stressed. So where the leaves at the top don't have good brakes, these people actually do have good brakes and they actually are prone to put on the brakes and say, whoa, the world is going too fast for me. And then the other risk here is a high risk for mental health issues, depression and anxiety. So because of the over intake of information, this group gets sensory overloaded much faster, much quicker. So the risk here must be considered. So we're managing ourselves and self-regulation is critical for all of us. For this particular group, it's critical. Hopefully that has given you some understanding and I hope that you could associate with it. Some of you, if you couldn't, there's obviously a lot more to, the sensory style processing than just the quick quiz, but it's a great way to get some sort of introduction. So hopefully that has created some information for you. A little bit about my research. I promise to keep it slow. It's been a big part of my life. We find in general there's 36% of people based on my samples that has got high thresholds, meaning busy, crazy, bring it on. 25% of people are more prone to be sensory overloaded and has got low thresholds, our roots. 39% of people are in the middle, meaning they've got medium thresholds, which I just think is really, really interesting to look at. The sad thing here, I think the world is very busy, depending, I guess, where you live in the world, but generally, if we look out in the world has become very busy, so it's suited to really well for 36% of people, but then 25% of people like, okay, what island can I escape to? And then if they do go on holiday, by the way, they will choose very quiet, contained spaces. I've also done my PhD research in a call center because it's the craziest workspace, trying to correlate how do we predict performance, absenteeism and attrition when people sit in very busy, high density spaces and they need to be able to focus, have client engagement on the phone. So it's really, that's been a bit of my research. If you wanted to go check it, my thesis is online, open for reading if you would like to look at that. And then if just go, for the last little bit into what do we do with this information, which is the critical thing for me, and me being an occupational therapist and coming from health sciences, it's all about self-regulation. But self-regulation for me is critical. And we look at this from a bottom-up versus a top-down approach. And I think this is maybe something where many of you in the coaching world will hopefully see the variation and the difference here. Typically, if we work with a cortical approach, we have a top-down self-regulation, a cognitive thinking approach. What we are saying, if we understand the environment and it actually activates through the brainstem and your spinal cord from the bottom of the brain upwards, we actually are engaging and talking about a bottom-up self-regulation approach. If we want to manage stress and overload, let's do a bottom-up combined with a top-down approach. But I'm obviously promoting a sensory bottom-up self-regulation approach. And briefly, 3 quick things. There's so much more to say about it, but sensory snacks, what are quick, fast tools that we can do to stay self-regulated? water bottle, sucking from a spout, mouth, very strong self-regulator, nuts, eating a healthy food, crunchiness actually activates, organizes the brain. Breathing, we know, is one of the key tools to use. It actually taps from the lower part of the body through the spinal cord, and it taps into the de-stressing autonomic nervous system in the brain, which is also a great sensory strategy. Why is it called a stress ball? A stress ball is something that you squeeze, you use the touch and the proprioceptive system, so you utilize the sensory pathway to calm the body, to organize the body and the brain. Those fiddle tools that we have, doodle, fiddle to focus, doodling and coloring in are great tools that we can do on the sideline when we are feeling stressed, anxious, or overloaded. It works really, really well. And then movement. We have to take more movement breaks, quick, easy, fast movement breaks, which really help to regulate the body and the brain. And balloons, I love balloons. Blowing up of balloons is another sensory self-regulation strategy. It taps into many other methodology, but it starts with a sensory element and a sensory stimulation path. Sensory diets, not what we eat, lifestyle choices, activities. Do you knit? Do you go bike riding? Do you swim? Do you do photography? What type of activity do you do in your free time? And is it aligned with your sensory needs so that it actually really fits into what works for your body and your brain so that you stay self-regulated? Sensory ergonomics, for me, it's how do we make tiny, small little changes to create less sensory overload in your life? Declutter, declutter, declutter. We all make that mistakes. Clutter, overload the brain from a visual point of view. We need to definitely declutter. Turn the lights down for some people. Others would turn the light up, but controlling light sources, natural lighting, much better for the brain. What space do you use when you work? Is it a home working environment? Is it a focus area? So workplace design have a massive role to play in how do we create environments that's conducive for people. Or is your ringer volume a nice tone that's pleasing to your ear? Or do you have a bit of a fight, fright response every time the phone rings? These are simple, easy strategies that we can use on a day-to-day basis. Small things matter in my world, and I think we often overcomplicate things. So small, tiny little changes to your environment can actually make a huge difference on your level of regulation, your sense, your state of calmness, your attention, your emotion, and your behavior, which is obviously critical. So just to recap, because I know we also want to do some questions. If we just look at our value chain, firstly, we do the sensory matrix, which is a comprehensive online tool to assess what are all your systems, what are your total results, how does your brain process the senses through your primitive brain pathways. Sensory audits is what does your environment look like? Is it overloaded? Is it conducive for you? And then we want to really thrive on insight and self-awareness, which is so critical in the coaching space. People need to understand themselves in order to understand others, in order to be successful in whatever environments that they're in. And then the three strategy sources on the left side of this circle is sensory snacks. What are the quick, easy things that we can access? Sensory diet. What type of activities do we do? Sensory ergonomics. How do we adapt the environment to be more conducive for us? Because everything starts with the senses and obviously the environment. I've written a book called Sensory Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ and EQ. It's available on Amazon if you wanted to read more, obviously. And then I think there's definitely time for questions. So I don't know if Demi wants to take over. I know it was a fast-paced learning, so hopefully I set some pace out there and to grab people with a different way of looking at human behavior. So that was definitely the idea.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I personally enjoyed this so much. While we talk, could you maybe go back to the quiz? Because we had quite
was I too fast?
No, some people could join a little bit later because of work obligations. So they missed the questions, but they followed the explanation, and they were very curious to see what questions were like. So while we take the questions, I think it would be really nice for people to just have another look at the
Okay, let's run through that quickly. Sorry, I'm now just repacing back on my slides. I'm too scared that I'm going to go out and then lose the just the screen again. Okay, so let's run through that again for those people who's missed it. So it's 15 questions. Do you prefer A or B? So remember, it's a quick screening, but it's a nice introduction. So you have to decide, do you prefer A or B? If we go, question 1, do you prefer seed bread rolls or plain bread rolls? Don't think too much about it. Just choose which one you would prefer. Is it A or B? 2, hot spicy chili mince or mashed potatoes. Obviously, chili mince, your spicy kind of food. Mashed potatoes, more blander food that doesn't have a lot of intense taste. 3, A, an electric toothbrush, or B, would you prefer a manual toothbrush? 4, A, red, orange, pink, or B, white, grey, or beige. Just think fast. 5, A, do you prefer bungee jumping, or B, scuba diving? If you haven't done it before, which one would you prefer, or which one would you go for? Hopefully people has gone through that. As I said, don't think too much, just go with your first gut feeling, because then we do measure the primitive brain. 6A, do you prefer a light tickle, or B, a firm hug? 7A, a night out in town with your friends, which is busy and lively, or do you want to be at home curled up with a book or a magazine at home in your quiet space? 8A, a surprise party, or B, monthly book or fishing club or a craft club, small group where you know people. 9A, polo neck sweater, B, V-neck sweater, because our clothes that we wear is actually a resemblance of our sensory preferences. 10A, aerobics at the gym, or B, weight training at home. Hopefully you've run through that. If I can move on to the last slide. 11, soccer, football, hockey, or B, golf, tennis, running. Which one would you go for? 12A, dogs versus B, cats, because they've got different sensory stimulation that they bring. 13A, do you prefer a phone call, or B, an email? 14A, camping, which is rough it, or 14B, a hotel. And then 15, gardening without gloves, or B, gardening with gloves.
Fantastic.
And then it's obvious, just calculate your score, how many A's and how many B's. Okay, great.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. We are going to jump into the questions in just a minute, everyone. We have a lot of questions. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll so you guys can give us your feedback on today's session. You know how much we love to hear from you and continuously improve our offering. So please take, it's just a couple of questions. So thank you so much for doing that for us. And I just want to mention again the study buddy offer that we have. So if you haven't heard of this before, if you would like to invite a friend or colleague to learn with you, if you can type study buddy into the Q&A box, and our support team will contact you and offer you and your study buddies some gifts and some special offers that we it's a surprise. So with that, I'm just going to jump into the questions. A lot of people asked, can the sensory preference change to some degree over a lifetime?
Yeah, people always ask that. Typically, if we look at the research and where it was actually based, it was founded in the 60s in the child development space. So in our world, all the research is based that it's fairly similar. As we get older, we do have a tendency to drop our thresholds a little bit, but most of it and most of the research and what it's based on, it is pretty stable, and more or less that should have been what you've been most of your life. We have seen some fluctuations and changes, but then there's obviously often, either an external reason, people either go through a trauma or there's real specific illness, which can then switch that. But what we are talking about is genetic predisposition. So it is kind of our genetic coding. So most of the time, and the right answer is that it actually doesn't necessarily change drastically. It can fluctuate a little bit, but if you're a root, you were most likely born a root. You might have adapted or used it differently when you were younger or when you are older, but more or less you are staying the same, and it is part of our genetic coding.
Thank you.
That's a quick answer. There's a longer answer, but that is the quick and the right answer to it.
There are quite a few questions that are similar. So many people wonder what, from your research, what has come up as, like, if there is a differentiator or if there is a larger sort of concentration of either of the three sensory types according to culture, country, sex, gender.
Yeah, what I've seen with my research, there's no gender bias. So usually women say, my husband don't listen to me, they must be high threshold. So no, there's no gender bias. It's very culturally relevant, but obviously we do see some cultural differences. I know, for instance, the amount of touch that, for instance, happen in Italy versus some of our other countries. So there could be cultural variations to a certain extent. Based on what we've been exposed to. So it is that nature versus nurture debate. So it's genetically predisposed, but from a culture point of view, we might find slight variations based on culture and based on upbringing and what we've been exposed to. Yeah, so it does play a bit of a role.
Great, thank you. A few questions about the introversion extroversion scale.
Always come up. There are definitely correlations with personality styles for sure. I originally, when I started working with it, I thought it was high threshold leaves extroverts, low threshold roots introverts. I know that's intuitively what we go for. While there are correlations with it, it's really not that straightforward. So because, for instance, we would have an introvert who bungee jumps. So bungee jumping is typically a sensory seeking type of a behavioral style, but it's introversion from a personality point of view. So there's a lot more correlation around adaptability, affect, than there are between extroversion and introversion. And there's also certain bodies of work. In our world, it comes from the occupational therapy space in child development. There's a lot of great work being done in the psychology field on looking at sensory processing as a personality style as well. From our world, it's really based on the environment. How can we understand and adapt the environment? So for me, the key lies into how do we apply strategies to make life easier and better for us. Sorry, I can see my screen is full of sunshine. I've got the afternoon sun. It's late.
It looks lovely.
It's not early morning in my side of the world.
No.
Any other question that was quite constant?
So the question that we usually get almost with every session is, how can coaches best apply this information in their coaching sessions, if you have any insights on that?
Yeah, obviously, I think if people get access to it, I've personally have been exposed to coaches who, never attended any of my comprehensive courses. I run 3-day courses that actually has read my book, gave my book to one of their clients. They've used the information in my book for a client and have made really successful adaptations in their lives. The hard thing is sometimes if your environment is totally a poor fit and it's really, creating a lot of stress and unnecessary overload and you're really unhappy, crazy but silly but very easy example is if you have a leaf working in a library, they're not going to be happy. It's not the right environment for them. So I think where we want to maximize environment fit, but it's all about insight and understanding. We share a lot of information, so my book would be a good place, but I think it's really helping people to understand themselves from a different level. And we post a lot of information. The Sensory Quiz is free on our website, so there are ways and means for people to actually get exposed to this and then just learn more about themselves and helping people to have more self-insight and self-awareness.
Thank you. That's a great tip. So for anybody interested into this subject and want to get the quiz as well, they can go to your website. That's great.
On our website, yeah. Anyone can complete it on our website. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's really great to know. Let me see. I think we have time for just one more question, unfortunately. But we welcome everybody to attend the implementation mastery sessions who start in 15 minutes. So if you haven't done so already, please go to the link that we've put in the chat previously and register for those. They are the perfect place for you to discuss with fellow coaches how to implement and utilize this knowledge into your everyday practice with your clients. So some people are, of course, trying to understand your material in comparison to other disciplines like NLP Do you have something to say on that? What the overlap is?
Primitive brain. The difference is NLP, and I'm not an NLP expert, and I think it's brilliant. I think there's absolutely place for every single methodology. We're not talking about the executive brain here. We're talking about, that's the key differentiator. We're talking about the primitive brain. How does information enters at the bottom of the brain? Because that's the entry point. What's the first response that happens? So what's that initial stimulus response that is happening? So that's the key differentiator of, we talking about primitive brain structures, initial responses in the brain, autonomic nervous system, reticular activating system. Those are actually setting the brain up for those rest of those spaces to happen. So it's not an executive learning style. It's a very fundamental, subconscious, and primitive way that the brain processes the environment. So that's definitely the key differentiator. And that's why there's so much focus on understanding the environment and how do we adapt the environment to be more conducive.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. As I said, there's hundreds of questions that are amazing and would definitely, we could spend another hour talking about that. But I know you will be presenting again at the Full Summit. So what will you speak about during the Full Summit?
You know, I think obviously with this just being an introduction and a lot of people haven't been exposed to the material before, I would love to always do a case study. How did we use this information in real practical life to make a difference for people? And I think that's all what it's about. What is the value? And the more extremes you are on these particular part of your sensory processing style, the more intensive and the more relevant and the more important that information obviously is. So I think it's a case study in how can we make this practical? How do we make this real? How do we put this into people's lives and help them to cope better? So that's always, I think, an ideal way to share the information.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for this. For everybody watching, if you want to read more about our Full Summit, please go to wbecs.com/summit. There you can find information about all the upcoming speeches and the whole schedule is live already. So go and have a look. Just to remind you that our super early pricing, which saves you 50% on all passes, ends on June 27th. So now is the time to get hold of your tickets. If you have any questions, please contact our team via email at support@wbecs.com, or you can also call us. Anya, my colleague, will put that telephone number on the chat for you. If we don't pick up, just leave a message. We have people monitoring this and are there to answer all of your questions. So thank you so much for joining us today. Up next, we have Harrison Monarth speaking about executive presence, develop confidence, competence, and influence beyond formal authority. Anna-Marie, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I don't know about everyone else. As a junior coach myself, I found it extremely interesting and eye-opening also for myself. I also took the little test, and you were right in your assessment of me. I am a root.
You gave it away at the beginning. I could read right through you.
When I was listening then later, I thought, oh my God, that's just me. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure sharing it with you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hope to see you at the Full Summit.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it too.
Great.
Thanks.
So goodbye.
Bye.
So I will be here to answer any questions you guys may have on the Full Summit. I'm open to take your questions. I already see that many of you have typed study buddy in the chat. Thank you so much. We will be collecting those, and our admin team will contact you. So I'm open to answer any questions you may have now. I would just like to say that we have 3 packages available for the Full Summit. We have the core package, the enhanced, and the ESL level. The core gives you access to all the online sessions. Enhanced gets you the live sessions and the recordings. And the ESL level, which is our most popular one, gets you access to the live sessions, the recordings, the slides, the transcripts, and you can download and keep all materials for live. So that's the best value package that we offer and that we recommend. So I'm just going to look through the Q&A and look for any questions that you may have. I'm just reading at your amazing comments. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to see that many of you loved this session. I loved it also. Donna says, one of my favorite sessions of the pre-summit. I'm right there with you. So thank you. We love reading your comments in the Q&A box. Just so you know, we love keeping these sessions interactive. So you're very, very welcome. I'm very happy to see that you found it interesting, that it was eye-opening. Anita, you're also a root. So I'm good to see. It's good to see I'm not on my own there. So let me see. Anita is asking, can we still access pre-summit recordings for a short period before the full summit? I have heard from my colleagues that there is an email that has circulated which mentions that there is the possibility to access some of the recordings for 48 hours. We call it a cinema page, and we will add that link to the chat box for you. Janet is asking, how about if I only need access 2 sessions for now? So if you only want to attend 2 of the sessions and the times and dates suit you, then you only need the core package, I suppose. So you can just make sure you attend the live session, and then that's it. But if you are asking if we give access to individual sessions, we don't do that. So the super early bird pricing ends on June 27th, just to repeat that. The full summit starts on September the 5th, and it lasts for 8 months. And yes, if you join with a friend, you can save up to $100. So just email our support team for the details. Okay, Janet meant access to these pre-summit sessions. So we do have some of the pre-summit sessions available in the cinema page. So if there are no other questions from you guys, I'm just going to let you join the implementation mastery sessions now. They start in just 7 minutes. The cinema page, someone is asking, Paula is asking about the link to the cinema page. Let me just check. This has been just posted in the chat box, Paula. Emily is asking for additional special rates. So from what I know, the best price that we offer is the super early bird price, which saves $750 off the full price, but we do offer payment plans as well. So if you go to the full summit page, wbecs.com/summit, you can see the payment plans for all 3 packages. And if you're just starting out, Emily, and you don't want to be overwhelmed with too many sessions, or you don't need to have the recordings for life, then maybe the core package is the right one for you. Shauna is asking about the mastery implementation sessions. So if you go to the second link that we have posted on the chat box, you will arrive at a page where you can register for we have several sessions for each of the speakers. So you can just register and you get a link like this one. You attend a webinar, an environment like this one, but there you can actually participate. You're in a group of, I think, up to 16 other coaches, and you can discuss this session with them live. And the sessions are curated, hosted by coach hosts who are familiar with the subject. It's actually very interesting, and we get so much amazing feedback from people that have participated in those, so we highly recommend them. All right, guys, I don't see any more questions. If any questions come up, we are available to chat or email or call with you. Just let us know. We're here to answer your questions. We can hear your story, recommend what the best option is for you. So don't hesitate, just give us a call. Once more, thank you for being here with me and attending this session. You're making it very special with your participation and your interaction. I hope to see you in the next session. So have a great rest of your day. And once more, thank you so much. Goodbye.